Welcome to the Stock Alternatives Podcast, hosted by Jeff Stock, actuary, investor, and strategic financial advisor. This podcast is dedicated to helping listeners reduce tax exposure, improve portfolio performance, and build more efficient wealth through alternative investments and structured financial strategies.
Hi, this is Jeff Stock with the Stock Alternatives Podcast, and today's guests are John and Michelle Brown. John and Michelle are building homes in the Pacific Palisades, and we have an investment opportunity with Stock Alternatives called the 20% steady income in real estate and an airplane teardown. And one of the key real estate components is the construction in the Pacific Palisades that John and Michelle are building. So today we're going to kind of meet John and Michelle, learn a little bit about them and their goals and what they're doing for the community that unfortunately was burned down by the devastating fires. But with every tragedy, there are opportunities, and we'll discuss that in detail. So, John and Michelle, maybe we start off. You could tell us a little bit about yourselves and why you love what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Jeff, and it's really exciting to be on with you. Very exciting to see all the cool things you guys are doing over there. Yeah, we lived in the Palisades. We lived there for 10 years. Michelle and I met. We are not just business partners, but we're married and we're co-parents, and co-parents almost sounds like we're not married. We're happily married.
Business partners and life partners.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's just been a really cool ride, and it's been a very, I don't know if ironic is the right word, but when we moved to the Palisades, we found this mobile home park, and it was this like really cool, it was this weird thing, right? To think, I grew up in a very suburban Long Island, nice middle class, and Michelle very similar, and I found this mobile home park because the cost of living is so expensive in LA, but this mobile home park wasn't like typical trailer park. It was, along the Pacific Coast Highway, overlooking the Pacific Ocean on one of the most exclusive, like beautiful, areas in the whole country. And long story short is we figured out how to build a prefab home, and in a mobile home park there's some limitations to that, but we figured out how to do it. And Michelle's a really talented designer and was under the guidance of a really dear friend of ours, Troy Adams, who is a very, very high-end developer. And we sort of took this very high-end 40 years of developer knowledge and modern execution, and then paired that with like, how do we be really cost efficient and really smart in building? And we used this factory builder, and we custom built this 2,000 square foot super, how would you describe the house that we built?
I mean, it was like, you're from the outside and the inside, it looked like a Pacific Palisades home. And we lived in the mobile home park. So we had this, home that probably would have been 5 million plus in the Palisades, like in the village, but we put it across the street from the beach. And we lived this beautiful little beach life in the mobile home park. But we sort of figured out how to build luxury with the efficiencies and cost effectiveness of a factory built. And we're like, this is genius.
I mean, people would come over. We have a really dear friend. He does $30 to $50 million luxury homes up in Malibu, and him and his, they very successful and very hardworking and very driven, and we really respect their style and their approach and everything. They're actually guardian to our two children. We're very very close with them. And anyway, they came over, and I'll never forget it when his wife, when she walked up into our second floor, because we're very, very custom in terms of everything that we do today. And that started from, the initial first build we did there, where we flipped the living space. So instead of typically you'd have all the bedrooms upstairs and you'd have your living space and everything downstairs, we flipped that. And maybe we could share some images and stuff so you can show as this streams. But so our view was from the upstairs, and we said before we started designing it was, well, why are we going to put the bedrooms upstairs? You spend very little time up there, and
You're asleep most of the time.
you're asleep.
Yeah.
It's dark, so like where we spend our time, we're going to have this big open floor concept. We should have it upstairs with a big deck that goes out and these views. Like Michelle said, I mean, you're talking about $1 million views, right? That people go, crazy over. So we did that. And when she walked upstairs, she looked outside and she was like, oh my God, I have house envy. And, these guys, they live in $30-40 million like houses. Like, so it was kind of like cool to see the reaction of like what you can do. I really think I love like the 80-20 rule and like the concept of that in business, that, you can spend tens of millions of dollars and create these existences for yourself. But there's ways, we would always say, we hacked our way into the luxury life. We really did. In the mobile home park specifically, and this isn't really in terms of like our business model, but in a sense, there's the philosophy of like, how do you hack your way into certain things or break the mold of what most people think is not possible? And everybody said, when we did a visioning, we had done a blue sky visioning work when we were living in West Hollywood, and we wanted to buy our first house. And I said, well, I surf. I said, I want it to be within, some distance of the ocean. And Michelle wanted to be able to have a place where, if we have kids, they're going to go to a good school, and all these things that people are like, you're crazy. You need $30 million for that. Like, that's not Southern California, what you're talking about for the numbers you're talking about. But it worked, and we did that. Then after we did that, the first house we did was actually a full gut remodel. And then we built this house custom that we ended up doing on a lot next door. And it just became a thing. And then we started saying, wow, we should do this in the Palisades on traditional lots. But could we do it in a way that doesn't have the constraints of what manufactured housing has? So without going into the weeds on it, there's prefab housing, factory built housing. Those are sort of one and the same. But then there's two classifications of them mainly. There's manufactured housing, and then there's modular housing. And manufactured housing is built to HUD code, which is a state building code that there's limitations to it. It's not the kind of thing where we would want to build those homes. One of the main things is it has something, what they call a chassis. And it's just, there's sort of like politics behind why they haven't changed all these rules and stuff. But we wanted to kind of take the same approach of a factory built house, not use local labor and materials and the slower build times and everything. How do we build it though? Totally custom, just like a site built home. And we found that factory partner. And so we have two factories. One is in Idaho, and then one is actually a steel, light gauge steel approach in California. And so we have these two options where we can build both wood and steel. They're built, again, everything you would imagine as a site built home, but it's built in a factory. And we do like 50% of the construction in the factory. It gets brought in, literally delivered onto the site, and craned onto the foundation, which of course we do on site. And then we do all the finishes, and we do it all custom, from start to finish. And the people we're building for, we have a few clients we're building for, but mainly we're focused on investment and spec type of builds, because the returns are are really healthy and we can actually come into the Palisades mainly. We'll do it in other markets too, but in the Palisades, we can really help the Palisades rebuild with still getting a reasonable, healthy return for investors, while at the same time holding true to what we feel is the most important, which is really maintaining the the life of the Palisades. It's this amazing place that we still call home. We absolutely love the Palisades. Our kids go to school there, and it was devastating what happened. But lots that sold for $3.5 million that were tear down lots, are selling for $2 million. So there's opportunity, but most people are building site-built homes the way they've been building for 100 years. And it's just too slow. They're just never going to build what needs to get rebuilt that way.
What would be the difference in the amount of time for a site-built home versus the way that you're building the homes? And maybe the difference in the cost as well.
Yeah, I mean, a site-built home, you're going to take, again, sometimes it's not apples to apples because we do everything internally, right? Like we're doing all of our, we buy a lot, we do the survey, we do the geo, obviously not us personally, but, we have a team of people that we have lined up and ready to go to do all these things so we can move things along very quickly. So there's not all the friction of, a developer buys a lot and finds an architect, and then the architect finds the builder, and maybe they have these things lined up. But since we have it all internal, Michelle does all the designs, and of course she has people that works underneath her to keep things moving. But we're able to do everything internally. And so really you're looking at probably like the equivalent site-built traditional approach that takes 2 to 3 years to complete, we can do in about 1.5 years. So it's about half the time. And the actual building of the home, they can actually build, a 4,000 square foot home in a couple of weeks in the factory.
The physical build time is a fraction of what it would be on site. And like the prep and like the design work is in a way similar to a site built, but like John said, we've just streamlined everything. Everything's very internal. Me being a designer, we can skip the process of having to go through an architect and then getting a designer. And I design the home architecturally, and then we send it to our structural engineers and they engineer everything once the design is complete, rather than having to kind of do the structure first, then engineering, and then you bring in like a designer to do all your finishing and what the home actually looks and feels like. So I think bringing it all in really creates like an efficiency in the process. As far as like setting it up, and then the actual build is just so much faster than the site build home. So, we're saving a little time on the front end and then a whole bunch of time during the actual build. And then, I think we definitely try to pay a lot of attention when it comes to the finishes. So we have like a keen attention to detail to make sure that everything is finished, like, a traditional site-built Pacific Palisades home.
Yeah, and I mean with timing, like we were just we were just at a meeting yesterday with some of the other builders, and one of their clients was there, and she was talking about how security has been an issue because there's so much building going on. There's not as many people living in some of these areas that got really burned out. And so she was talking about that they went onto the lot and they stole 100, what was it that they stole? So $5,000 worth of some kind of materials. I forget off the top of my head exactly what it was, but it was building materials, right? I don't remember if it was just like 2x4s or framing. But they're in that stage where you have your wood sitting outside. So first of all, obviously environmentally, you're not, if it rains, not that it rains that much here, but it does rain sometimes, and sometimes that could take a week or two off of a schedule. Plus everything's getting wet, which,
Right, what does that do to your framing?
I mean, we just accept it. We go, oh, well, it dries out and everything. Sure, it dries out, but still the inside of your house is getting soaking wet while it's being built. And then, yeah, there's, materials get stolen off of lots as they're being built, so that there's security issues. We don't have any of those things, right? The core part of our house, all of the framing, all of the drywall, all of the floor, you're not going to have finished floors or tile. I mean, we can do some of that stuff in the factory, but we like to do it on site. But the house is completely closed up and contained and plastic wrapped essentially before it leaves the factory. So yeah, there's you don't have the slowdowns, and you have workers that show up at 7:30 in the morning and they work until 5:30 at night, and they work in a climate controlled environment. So they have better working conditions. So their work represents that too. When we first went to the factory, one of the guys was telling me, when he used to work in the field, he's in construction, and when he used to work in the field, at the end of the day, the sun's beating on him and he's exhausted. He just wants to go home, and he's like hanging off of a ladder, hammering nails, and he's like, whatever, just kind of. He's like, you just don't have it in a factory. Everything is said. They have, again, we can maybe intercut video and stuff so you could see how these factories are set up. I mean, it's the Henry Ford of building homes, and why it hasn't completely caught on in this country. A lot of it has to do with lobbying, and you go, why doesn't everybody build that way? There's a lot of politics and money behind site built homes, and so they continue to do it that way. But
I heard in other countries though, like a lot of the homes are built with offsite building, like in Scandinavia.
Sweden, Denmark, you look that stuff up. Germany, there's a lot. As a matter of fact, my best friend is married to a Swedish girl who, she's been here in the country for only 5 or 6 years, so not completely Americanized. And when he was telling her about what we're doing, because he was investing, and she said, well, what's different about what they're doing? And he said, well, they build everything in the factory. And she said, yeah, but what's different about it? Is the factory different? And she said, well, no, they build it in a factory. And she says, but isn't that how homes are built? She couldn't believe that you bring all of the materials onto the site, and then and the main thing she said is well, how do you build outside? Doesn't it get wet? And aren't there so she thought it was funny. Just what we're used to, but it's a better way to build. It just really, when you dig into it, and then when the house is done, people go, what's different about it? I mean, if you did like a Coke and Pepsi challenge with a site built home and a factory built home and put them side by side, and you gave it to a contractor of 45 years, they would not be able to tell the difference. They're built pretty much the same way. The only thing that they would probably recognize is they would go, how did you get the corners on this house so perfect? Why is everything so square and so plumb? And because when they're building it in the factory, they have these systems set up that allows them to do it that way. And then again, there's no warping, there's no none of that's happening to the house. So
could you tell us about the experience of the prefab company as well as the contracting team that you're working with?
Yeah, the factory that we partnered with, we looked at about 24 different factories, technically 100, but I mean, we really weeded out a bunch of them right from the start, because we were like, oh, these guys, won't do custom. A lot of the factories won't do custom builds because they just want to, they get one of their plans. We get permitted at the state level instead of the local. Sometimes it could be at the local level, but most of the time we're permitting at the state level. That's another thing that makes things move a lot quicker. We don't have to wait for inspectors to come and inspect all of the electrical before we put the drywall on, because we have third-party vendors that are doing that in the factory while the house is being built. So it's another thing that really speeds things up, because sometimes you're waiting 2 weeks for an inspector to come, and people are looking at the house and going, why aren't they working on that house anymore? Are they running out of money or something? A lot of times they're just waiting for the inspector. So we don't have to do that in the factory. We're doing all of our inspections, and then it comes on site and it's all closed up. the factory that we ended up partnering with has been building for 50 years. So they built thousands of homes. They're based out of Idaho. They're basically white labeling homes for us. So, we said, we'll take all of the custom stuff off of your lap, which, by the way, they don't want to do that, right? They want to churn out homes. They don't want to be like, talking to the client about what tiles you're going to use and all that stuff. So they don't have to do that with us. With us, we're giving them a plan. They're building the home. And then we're basically getting a blank slate for Michelle to then come in with our contractors on site. We basically have an off-site contractor and an on-site contractor. Our on-site contractor is actually a partner in our company. So he has a vested interest in ensuring that everything's finished correctly and, the timeline moves quickly and all of those things.
How are the permits in California? Because I hear a lot of stories, California is a difficult state to build homes. Is the permitting process easy? Is it hard? And like, what makes it, what makes the people wrong that are saying permits are hard in California?
I mean, I think traditionally they have. I think building is difficult in California because there's a lot of code, right? And the code is constantly getting more refined, and I don't know if I would say less efficient, but it certainly creates roadblocks a lot of the times. But, I'll also say, let's say with our first home, people said, you'll never get this done. They're not going to allow it, because we were building something very different. Like, people, again, think of mobile home parks or trailer parks, and they think like you're putting in a mobile home. We built basically a home in a mobile home park, right? People would walk in and they'd be like, well, what's mobile about it? I was like, it's not a mobile home, And they would say, you can't do this. Nobody does this. Nobody's ever done this before. And I have a way of, perseverance and working with them, and also understanding, like the people at these permitting offices, at LADBS, Los Angeles Department of Building and Safety. A lot of times you can just talk to them. And I think that most of the time people go in there and they're creating friction and they're making it more difficult on themselves. There are situations where if you're in a certain zone, let's say you're right along the PCH, and you're in a coastal lot that has hillside variances, that has all sorts of zoning restrictions. Yeah, you're going to have a hard time. But we don't use those lots. We don't, we start smart from the beginning. So one of the first things we do before we would buy a lot is we do a lot of due diligence to make sure that we're going to be able to coast through a lot of that. You could have two lots side by side that have completely different zoning. And so we've also gotten very good at just being able to navigate that and figure it out. I would say that on average, the kind of lot that we purchase and that we build on, you're looking at, 2 months of permitting. You know what I mean? It's not brain surgery. It's really not, and also a lot of the times people are building things that are extremely complicated. And again, they're permitting at a local level. We're permitting at the state level. So we're cutting out a lot of that inefficiency there too.
Got it. What about like fires? Because there was a fire before. What prevents there to be another fire? Or like, what other risks could there be for potentially investors that are putting money behind these projects?
Yeah. I mean, we build to the highest insurance standard. When you want to talk about IBHS.
Yeah, so we, we've been working closely with insurance companies and IBHS specifically to be able to get a IBHS certification on our homes, which basically means we're following certain rules and guidelines for our builds that ensure the utmost protection for the house in case there is another fire. A lot of those main things are creating, a hardscape moat, you would call it, I guess, around your home. Being smart about your landscaping and your hardscaping. Um, and it's through the, and like, it's like through like all of our building materials, we're using certain kinds of insulation. There's no wood, no wood fences, no vinyl fencing. It's all being like really smart about the materials that we're choosing.
And IBHS, just, I'm sure most people don't know, but once you go through a fire, you learn about a lot of these things. But IBHS is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. And people can go to IBHS. I think it's IBHS.org. And you can see what they've done is they're a consortium that's working with the insurance companies to say, look, guys, what do you want us to insure as certain characteristics of a home for you guys to view them as insurable, right? And not just insurable, but also discounted. What's the best premium? What could we tell, if we, you think about the 3 little pigs, right? That's like, what is the equivalent of the brick house, right? And IBHS has created that standard, and they have a couple of different levels. We only bill to their highest level. So whatever we build, we know that we're going to get the highest IBHS certification on that home. And then what that does is then you go out to the insurance industry and you say, hey, insurance industry, we have a home that we need to insure. And you go, well, what's the highest IBHS standard? And it's the gold or standard, whatever they call it. And the insurance industry goes, oh, we want to insure them, right? Because it's kind of like the creme de la creme to have an IBHS. Again, I forget the exact level it is. It's like the equivalent of saying it's like the gold level of certification. And we ensure that every home is built to that standard. It's like no eaves, certain kinds of, external materials. It's like at the end of the day, like we even talked to Mercury at one point. We said, hey, if we build a steel framed home, is that going to increase the insurability? And they were like, we don't really care that much about that. We're looking at like eaves, roof material, siding material.
Vents.
Right. No vents. There's some things that for the insurance, they know, they know what causes these kinds of fires, and and then a lot of the times too, they're not even looking at fire, they're looking at flood, and they're going, no, don't worry about, just don't have any eaves or vents, but make sure that you have shut-off valves to make sure there's no flooding or something, so there's all these other things
Okay.
too.
Interesting. Now, are you guys building smart homes that can tell you what's wrong with the homes or anything
We
like
use
that?
a lot of tech. I've always been very techy, so I get, we stay pretty ahead of it. We also want the home to be
User friendly.
I could, if it were up to me, the house would be
A spaceship.
a spaceship. It would be.
And how do you decide where to build? Like, are there ocean views? Like, how are these homes going to be kind of different or better than other homes that are being built?
So a few of the things we look at, going back to the lot thing, is like one thing is we want lots where we can build. We want to have it some kind of like fun advantage, right? So there's certain neighborhoods, the alphabet streets, for instance, in the Pacific Palisades, have a favorable floor area ratio in the zoning. So FAR, that's the amount of square footage, livable square footage that you can build on a lot. And like in the alphabet streets, it's 65%. So if I have let's say 10,000 square foot lot, I can build a 6,500 square foot house. On most of the lots, they have a 45% floor area ratio. So on a 10,000 square foot lot, I can only build a 4,500 square foot house. Now, not to say that we want to build like mansions that don't fit, that don't look right. Again, our priority, or I would say maybe a tie for our first top priority, are maintaining the integrity of our town that we love, while at the same time, obviously having a business that makes sense financially, economically, right? Of course, we have a fiduciary responsibility to investors too. And we don't have the luxury of doing this for fun or for charity, because we do have 2 kids that like to go on trips and do fun
Toys.
things, and they're toys. But at the same time, we do think that it's really important that we maintain the integrity. So when I say, it's not like we're going and building a 65% of the lot, but there are certain things like that. And then there's the other obvious things, like you mentioned, like, does it have a really cool view? That's obviously a big deal. We have a lot we're working on right now that does have like these sweeping ocean views. And honestly, like, it wasn't even priced as ocean views, because what was there before didn't completely capture the ocean views, and we're doing certain things with grading. And again, it's where we go in, we look at it, and we find ways. This goes back to the beginning of like hacking our way into certain things, just being creative about looking at things with a different lens. And I think we just have it seems like we've just found opportunity where people overlook it sometimes. So view is sometimes really important. Walkability to the village. Palisades has like this really amazing central village. The Palisades is like a weird town for LA, because there's really nothing like it, where there's like a central village, and it feels like small town USA, but it's along the coast in LA. So, one of the reasons that it's the most expensive real estate in the country, right, or a lot of it. So
I think you guys did a great job explaining this. This is a long time for someone to be watching. So if you're a viewer, we appreciate you sticking with us for over a half hour. Do you have any questions before we conclude?
The main thing is that, we're just enthusiastic about it. I mean, we really,
yeah.
I mean, we really like it, because it's not just building homes, where we're building our town back, So, and I think that comes through in what we're doing. We have a real, there's plenty of people that are building in the Palisades right now, and there's some that have our unique situation, but not really, right? Like our school burned down, our elementary school burned down, the church that, we sent our kids to preschool to burned down. The yogurt shop burned. I mean, the whole place burned down, the life of it. And we're building it back now already. It's the fact.
When do you think it's going to be fully back, fully alive?
Historically, this is already proving to be the fastest rebuild in the history of the United States for one of the biggest disasters in the history of the United States. And it's exciting to be a part of that. We're already seeing there's a rec center. Like I said, this is like small town USA, right? So there's like a central like recreation center with basketball, and there's the playground, and there's like fields and all this kind of stuff. And the one thing that's different about this not being small town USA is you have JJ Redick from the Lakers and Rick Caruso, who ran for mayor and is a very successful businessman who's very integrated into the Palisades. He has a huge shopping center, a lot of vested interest there. And, Jamie Lee Curtis and, Ben Affleck and all these people that either have second homes there or they live there. They think of it as their home. Billy Crystal was the mayor of, Palisades for a while, like, the town mayor. And so you have all this influence, and all these people are helping rebuild it faster than anything has ever been rebuilt before. And so, like the rec center, for instance, you have the Lakers and these guys that are coming in, they're building these like super cool, like basketball courts and, and playgrounds. And that's supposed to open within the next 12 months. And it's already been about 12 months, so
the timing where you guys are building is perfect for a brand new community with beautiful homes and beautiful.
Yeah. Rick Caruso is reopening. He saved his whole shopping center, which was like a brand new shopping center, this outdoor, like really high end, beautiful shopping center, coffee shops, pizza places, and all sorts of cool stuff. That will open at the end of the summer. So that's already going to be open in, less than 6 months. And the high school was saved. So you have all the high school back. One of the best high schools in Southern California. The schools are rebuilding. They should be back by 2027. So in about a year and a half, right about when we would have homes that are going to be finished and people are moving back, the town is, roaring, and it's going to be, everything's going to be brand new and, beautiful. And the spirit of the Palisades will be better than it ever was. I think there's going to be a rush. And I think that, prices are only going to exceed what they were before the fire because, everything's going to be new.
Correct. And even if they aren't, the investors will still be getting very good returns. We have a lot of buffer in place for that.
Yeah.
So,
And if we hold on to something for an additional 6 months while prices continue to rise, and again, we're building a product that I think exceeds what everyone else is building, because most people aren't even looking at the insurance standards. They're builders, so they're not digging into all these different aspects of it as much. So I think we'll have a huge competitive advantage because of that.
well, thank you both. You guys did a great job explaining what you do. Watchers of the Stock Alternative podcast, this is actually our first episode, and there'll be a lot more coming. So we appreciate you listening, and more to come. Thanks, John and Michelle.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to the Stock Alternatives Podcast with Jeff Stock. At the end of the day, wealth is determined not only by how much you earn, but also by how much you keep through smart tax strategies. For business owners, retirees, and high-income professionals seeking greater returns, steady income, tax relief, purpose-driven investments, and portfolio diversification, visit stockalternatives.com to learn more or schedule a personal meeting with Jeff Stock.